So, you want to make a historical ball gown. Great! But how the heck do you come up with an idea when there are so many options to choose from? Or even if you have something in mind that you want to recreate, how do you take that Worth gown from the Met or that slightly grainy fashion plate from 1898 and turn it into not only something that you can wear, but that you look good in? Because there are no patterns for your dream ball bodice. You can't just go to Joann's and get what you need. This is an essential part of the sewing process, and it's weirdly not one anyone ever talks about. It's just sort of hand-waved into existence thanks to the magic of YouTube. That not helpful. And since this was the thing that I personally struggled with the most when making my Aurora Borealis 1890s ball gown, and since Potato Jackie is currently on, I think, her 12th night in a row, staying up past midnight, deliriously beating the skirt, I thought it might be fun to pull up the petticoat and show you the magic behind the scenes, figuratively. I want to quickly talk first about planning and research, because being able to wrap your head around that first, before you start buying stuff willy-nilly, will save you a lot of heartache and money down the line. I've organized all of the steps into chapters, so if you want to skip the talking head and go straight to the patterning or the frou-frou wrangling, it's all down there for you. One of the biggest issues is figuring out where to start. It's like cleaning your house after months of holidays and events. Everywhere you look, there's something that needs doing, and like, what disaster do you tackle first? I find that the best way to do it is to think of or write down everything that you know already so far. That could be era, color, inspiration, budget, time of year, location, etc. The general theme for this ball is Art Nouveau and aestheticism. I just did natural form and I do a ton of second bustle already, and I wanted something different, so I decided to do late 1890s. It's also in Chicago in March, which is a heck of a lot cooler than it is here in March, by about 60 degrees. So I also wrote down that I needed to make sure this was a little bit heavier than the things I normally make, and it would probably be a good idea to incorporate some actual outerwear into the equation. We already did that video. Most of us will be pulling our designs from extents or fashion plates. Even if you already have a gown that you want to recreate, it'll still help you a lot to look at other extents from that period of time. Especially because when you're looking at a museum website or if you're looking at a fashion plate, you often can't get a full 360 of the gown. So you kind of have to pull from other things, you know, the views that you can actually see and make some educated assumptions. So while you're doing this, there are a few things that you should be considering. Where are the closures? Do you see any closures at all? You can't always. How is it hemmed? What are the support layers? What do the insides look like? What are some repetitions or style designs that you see over and over when you're looking at things from either a certain era or even from a certain designer? For example, if you start looking at a lot of Worth gowns, you will probably notice that they favor a crossbody design over and over and over again. I also noticed in my research that in the 1890s, especially the late 1890s, they put frou-frou over everything, along the neckline, in the center front of the bodice, on the sleeves, along the skirts at the bottom. Just so much of the frou-frou, which of course is the hardest thing to pattern. Learn from my mistakes. Solidify your design before you buy all your supplies. Of course, this is a process and things are going to change as you start sewing, but having a very firm idea of what you're going to do before you start purchasing things is going to save you so much heartache. Otherwise, you'll end up with $100 worth of supplies that you don't intend to use for this project, and now you got to find a place to store it all. Even if you're not a visual person, you might not be able to draw, you don't have to have a perfect artistic rendering of what you want to do. It could just be a bulleted list of design elements. You could even just have a Pinterest board of inspirational photos. So this is when we want to start really figuring out what the bodice is going to look like. Think about the shape of the neckline. In this late 1890s period and into the turn of the century, the necklines have gotten delightfully low. They're very scooped. Think about the shape of the sleeves, where the bodice will close, the length of the bodice, as well as the different layers and textures that are going to go on there. A lot of these late 1890s designs have a base fabric, and then there's a frou-frou texture, and then usually some lace and beading and stuff that goes over top of everything. There's no other way to put it. You're gonna have a heck of a time trying to find a bodice that looks exactly like the bodice that you want to make, especially if you want it in a modern size and not like standard Victorian sizing. The solution is to make a bodice block. If you've done any kind of modern sewing or even vintage, you may be familiar with the concept of a sloper, but this is basically just a standard, no design bodice pattern that is perfectly fit to your body already. Then you can use that to draw on all of your creative elements. There are a couple of different ways to make a sloper. First, you could just draft it. Francis Grimble's books have directions on how to actually draft a sloper for that period of time. You can also use one of those free pattern cutting guides that you can get on archive.org. Another way to do it is to drape the bodice. Or you can start with a basic commercial pattern, which is how I like to do it. There aren't a ton of great options out there for late Victorian ball gown patterns. The black snail ball bodice pattern is the one that we'll be using today. This is good for the 1880s and the 1890s. Once you find the pattern that you want to use, you need to fit it to your measurements before you start modifying the design. I'm not going to show that in the video because A, it merits its own dedicated video, and B, we've already done it. Here's the bodice lining, cut out and basted. I did have to make some basic modifications for my S-bend since this bodice was actually fit to my 1880s corset. Specifically, I extended the side seam by 1/2 inch at the underarm, extended the hip curve, and extended the center front out into a curve to accommodate the more drastic bust in the S-bend. Getting some weird wrinkling happening here at the waist. I also extended the shoulder in the front, again to accommodate the larger bust. Now it's a little droopy on this side, but on the smaller arm size side, it's impeding my arm movement. To get the scoop neck instead of a square neck, I pinned back the neckline. I also pinned back the square line in the center back to get a lovely V shape. Okay, so we've got our bodice shaped the way that we want it. And now I'm gonna show you how I transfer from the actual mock-up to our pattern pages. Here's my bodice back piece. The first thing I need to do is add 1 inch to the top here. Make sure you leave your future self notes. So I have just one little triangle here. So I'm gonna look specifically at this part here because this is essentially where the center seam is. And for me, that length is precisely 3 inches. I'm gonna go down on my bodice piece and I'm gonna mark 3 inches. And then I'm gonna go up 5/8 of an inch for seam allowance. Okay, so this is my cutoff spot right here, okay? Not here where we want it to eventually be. All we need to do from here is follow the line. Okay, and then when I cut this out, I'll just fold this, boom, like that, and then the original is preserved. This piece is going to be just a little trickier. Once again, we're gonna go into here and we're looking specifically at where the center front is. And again, we are right at 3 inches down. We'll mark that here. If you remember when I had this on, this is more of a sweetheart neckline, I don't want that. So I'm gonna take one of my previous mock-ups that had the neckline, the scoop neckline that I wanted. Follow this curve. Whoosh! French curve. When you're doing a neckline like this, you wanna make sure that it kind of flattens out right here at the center or you will get that weird dip. With those changes made, we are ready to go and get everything cut out, serged, and assembled, and I will catch up with you when all of that is done. Okay, so we are assembled in the back and basted in the front. We are getting a little bit of weirdness, specifically right here, but I can fix that. This is just basted together. I am still getting some wrinkling here. I reduced the dart just a little bit and that helped. Definitely some weirdness happening in this side back panel. That is all just basted down, so I think once I take out the basting and restitch it, I think it's a flatlining issue and not necessarily a fit issue. Let me go and get this fully sewn up, and then we'll make some more decisions. So we're at that point in the project where I'm kind of at a standstill because everything that needs to be done right now, and none of it can be done because it's all dependent on everything else that needs to be done right now. For example, I can't hem the bottom of this until I decide exactly how I want to overlap the front of it, but I can't overlap the front of it until I figure out the frou-frou, but I can't figure out the frou-frou until it's hemmed. Does this ever happen to you? Because I feel like there's a point in every project where I come to this juncture in the road and I just want to pull my hair out. So what I've done is I've gone and I've kind of pinned the center front where I want it and pinned the hem where I want it-ish. That'll be enough to do the frou-frou. Frou-frou, wrangle in the frou-frou, wrangle in the frou-frou, wrangle in the frou-frou-frou-frou-frou-frou. Ideally, you want to figure out the frou-frou earlier in the design process, but I have a very special circumstance which meant that I had to wait until I was at this stage to even think about it. I have 1 yard of this. It was a really good price because there was only 1 yard in existence. So all of my frou-frou needs to be cut out of this, and a lot of it is dedicated to the giant sleeve, or the oversleeve, I should say. I have already kind of decided that I'm gonna cut it about 4 inches shorter. Since we're doing a late 1890s ball gown instead of an early 1890s ball gown, the sleeve large. Ideally, in a perfect world, I want to get a triangle that goes down to the very bottom here that is pleated in a fan out away from the center front. And then I would also like to have like a little swoopy, definitely a swoopy in the center back, going to the point in the center back and over the sleeves. The first thing I've done is measured the distance between here and here, which is where I want the V to kind of sit. And then I measured the distance from the top here to the bottom, seam allowances, give or take, and I cut out a square of fabric that is 3 times that width. If you're enjoying this video or finding it helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up and saying hello in the comments. This goes a long way into getting this video out there. If you'd like to further support this channel, I've linked to my Ko-fi page below. Thank you to all of my current supporters. It really means the world that you're here and helping to make these fabulous and crazy designs come into existence. This one has really been a doozy, and I'm so excited to share the final make with you. If I ever get it finished. I'm not panicking. I'm not freaking out. I'm freaking out. Well, that was a bust. Let's experiment with the real thing and see if it looks any better. I marked where the sleeve pattern ends on the organza. So I quite like the organic puff happening right here on the swoop of the neckline. That feels very late 1890s, early 1900s to me. I do still like the pleating at the neckline, but I'm leaning towards maybe doing the puff right here and attaching that directly to the bodice, and then doing a smaller pleated bit below it with maybe some trim here to distinguish between the two pieces, and that can be like an overlap so that we can hook it on the other side and hide the center front opening, which is something that I definitely want to do. But I think it's time for the most important part of the design process, which is to pin it and let it marinate for at least a day. So yesterday, after staring at what I did, I realized that I really need to look at the frou-frou using only the organza that I have to work with instead of the entire yard of it. So I went to go and cut out the oversleeve, only to realize this is not the whole sleeve pattern. There is another piece that gets attached to this side. Do you see any notation about that? No, it would take 5 seconds to say attach to 7B here. I had that piece in my hand when I cut all of this out, and I was like, what the heck is this for? I don't know, and I threw it out. If it had just been labeled better, I could have done that and saved myself so much time. Instead of wasting all of that time sifting through however many pages, 70 pages of pattern tiles to figure out which pages are that little bit of sleeve, and then printing it out, putting it together, cutting it out, and then having to modify the sleeve anyway because it's not the actual shape that I want, I decided, screw it, let's just modify it and make it fit anyway. However, to do that, we actually need to figure the sleeve out. So I've put the thing on and I need to fit the sleeve. This is about where I want the puff part of the sleeve to end. So this is the puff side, this is the normal side. And then I measured from this to my elbow, and that is a 4-inch difference. That is going to be an important number. Here is my semi-complete sleeve, and we've got this sort of lined up where pretty much the only place that I can put it on this yard of fabric and get it cut out correctly. Here's the sleeve lining. So essentially we're missing the underarm right here. I do want to point out all of these marks, every single one of these marks on this sleeve except the 2 is for matching this sleeve to this sleeve. There is only one registration mark to match the sleeve to the arm side. You cannot have only one registration mark on an asymmetrical sleeve like this. That is unacceptable. It took me way too long to try and figure out which way the sleeves went. Now we need to figure out how much sleeve we need to add. For my sleeve size, 4 1/4 inches extending from this mark out. And I'm tempted to just extend this down here, like that, and make the puff a little bit smaller. On second thought, that may ruin the proportion of puff to sleeve, so I'm gonna nix that. If we move this over 4 inches, it would stop here. Let's move this up. 15 inches of width here. So that gives me a decent amount of space, plus this 4-inch strip down here, and I'll show you what I plan to do with that. This is my inspiration for the sleeve. I love the puff with the elegant fall of fabric below it, and I think it gives a good opportunity to add a bow and some trim to tie in the other colors of the skirt. You'll want to use your French curve to find the correct angle, then translate that down onto the fabric. And then we need to check and make sure that we've got a little more than 4 inches below that line for the frou-frou. In a perfect world, I would cut this out of the muslin and test it out first, but I don't have time for that because I have less than 2 weeks to finish this entire ball gown. So we're just gonna go for it and rely on the extra size and the gathers to cover all of our mistakes. Sleeve cut, and that leaves this piece, 2 lovely on-grain strippies, and this, which could potentially be useful for us as a backing. We'll see. The trim came today. I'm really excited. It was pretty expensive. It was $7 a yard. But when I saw this, I knew it was going to be perfect for this project. Originally, I was going to hand embroider everything instead of using trim, and feasibly, I am just not going to have time to do that. So it's quite pretty. It's got little flowers, and it's beaded, and these little rainbow beads here, they match almost exactly the beads that I've already purchased to put on the end of the organza sleeve. So it's going to tie in nicely with what I already have, and I think it's going to marry the bodice and the skirt together in the best way. I'm a very organic trimmer in that I like the trim to sort of tell me the story it wants to tell. That sounds so hokey. I like to do the trim last and really pin it, play with it, live with it for a little bit, and figure out what I like the best. I do have some very specific things I want to do with it. First is we're gonna put it along the edge of the ruching on the sleeve where it attaches to the undersleeve to hide the ruching. I also intend to use some of it on the center front with the frou-frou once I figure the frou-frou out. And then whatever I have left over will probably get put on the bottom of the skirt. And here's the next iteration of frou-frou with the trim tacked down for ultimate visuals. It's been a couple of days since I've seen you, in which I have been futzing with this and mulling it over and staring at it every night while I sit on my couch frantically beading. It's kind of a dull process and it does take a long time, but so does everything else. So I kind of like this. I think that I want more of a fluff right here at the center. I widened the pleating out a little bit on this side. This side is a little bit narrower, and I think that looks better. It looks more like the turn of the century ball gowns that I'm going off of. I also think shortening it did a lot because I want to see some of this teal down here at the bodice. But I think the most important thing that made this start to work was putting the trim, putting the trim on the bottom of the bodice. It really started to tie everything else in. I really wanted to get this on the dress form for this, but I'm still embroidering it and I I don't want to take it out. It was looking just a little incongruous, but with this trim here and the trim that's going to be along all of the bottom of the skirt, I think that is going to help out. However, the one thing that's really interrupting my vision is the sleeves. Because we just have the lining on there right now, it doesn't look right. It looks frankly hideous. So I think the next step is to take off the lining, shorten the sleeves, modify the sleeves, get them to look the way that we want them to look in the final dress, pop them back on, and then make some final decisions about the frou-frou. So let me show you how I take the standard sleeve that we have and change it into the sleeve that we want. But first, we're gonna put some registration marks on the sleeves, here and here. No confusion ever again. Next, let's shorten those sleeves. To get a nice puff, you need to consider the length as well as the width. I'm not gonna say it. So here is our shortened sleeve. So in theory, we have this much length to play with. Since the magic number was 4 inches, we will measure up from the bottom of this 4 inches and draw a line. This is where we will put our gathering stitches. The rest of this length will get pushed up to form the puff, and it'll get gathered to the edge of the lining. Okay, but not a brilliant idea to fit the puff sleeve over a puff sleeve. BRB. Yeah, looks pretty good. Bonjour. So last night I just slept on all of the things that I had already previously done. It was all sort of together anyway. And I find that I like it a lot better now that we have the sleeves on. I do love the way that you can kind of see the teal through the navy, and it kind of gives it that aurora borealis sort of vibe that we're getting from the bottom of the skirt. I'm happy with the bands at the top here. I would like smaller, finer pleats here and a puffier top. All of that is really going to depend on the final fit of the bodice, and I can't get the final fit on the bodice until I finish assembling the bodice. The sleeves are only basted in. I have no structure in here. I haven't finished the top. I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking. I'm gonna take a picture so I don't forget what it looks like during the sewing process. But I think the next step is to take all of this off, finalize the bodice, get all of the raw edges taken care of, and then put it back on and really start playing with the shape of this. All right, let's get to it. So here's the final frou-frou plan. We're going to cut off this bit here and use a rectangular strip of this organza to pleat 8 inches down the bodice, starting from this point I marked here. Once it's pleated, we'll cut the extra down to reduce bulk and hide the hem with trim. Then whatever width is left will be used for the dramatic center front puffs. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the final Aurora Borealis gown, you can check out this video here on the screen. If you're watching before that one goes live, why not check out this video where I show you how to fit this bodice in a very easy and approachable way. That's it for me. Thanks for watching. I love y'all, and I'll catch you in my next video.